The last program today, and the two of you have waited a long time, and you're very patient, is the Child Witness to Violence program in Boston. And the presentation will be made by Betsy McAllister Groves and by Captain Robert Dunford of the Boston Police Department.
Thank you. We may be last, but we certainly are not least, and it's a pleasure to be here at last. Our program addresses the epidemic problem of young children's exposure to violence in their homes and in their communities. Daily in my work as a social worker at Boston City Hospital, I encounter young children who have witnessed violence in their communities. These children may have been innocent bystanders to gang shootings or to drug deals that went bad, or they may have seen their mothers abused by their partners. Why is this an important problem to address? In short, because today's children are tomorrow's adults and tomorrow's citizens. And these children, if not provided intervention, are at significant risk for emotional difficulties, learning problems, and aggressive behavior. In order to protect themselves against the overwhelming horror and terror of witnessing violence, of seeing someone they know being shot or assaulted, these children become emotionally numb, often at a young age. They lose their feelings, their sense of compassion, and their empathy. This, we believe, sets the stage for violent and antisocial behavior in later life. So the Child Witness to Violence program is an early intervention project seeking to prevent violent behavior in children by intervening early to provide counseling and other support services. So where do the police fit into this picture? As we discuss the challenges of identifying these children and engaging in effective outreach, we realized early on that police saw these kids all the time, and that they were in a unique position to identify children and make referrals because they were often first on the scene of a violent incident. So we approached Captain Dunford about this idea of a partnership to identify children. The core of this partnership is a seminar which is offered to officers on working with children who are affected by violence. The seminar brings together police officers and health and mental health professionals from Boston City Hospital. The broad goal is to increase all of our repertoire of skills in helping children and families. Now, the idea of pulling together hospital social workers and police officers is actually very simple and also quite easily replicable. But despite its seeming simplicity, it is not often done. In fact, in my 20 years as a social worker working with high-risk families, I had never worked with a police officer until this project. Initially, we weren't sure this would work. As one officer later put it, it was like putting sumo wrestlers at the table with 60s flower children. However, we have learned that even though we have very different responsibilities in the public sector and different ways of approaching problems, that we also have a wide area of common concern. And that was about children and about the future of children in this country. Because of our common concern, we have forged what we think is an unusual but very effective collaboration using all of our best skills to help children and families.
Good afternoon. A practical example and a comment on integration. A year ago, Labor Day weekend, we had an ambush-style drug-related homicide on Whitten Street in Dorchester. Whitten Street is a residential neighborhood of 1- and 2-family homes. There were about approximately 70 people who either witnessed the shooting or heard it to come out of their homes. About 30 of those were children under 12 years of age. Within 3 days, we had a major block party in the middle of Whitten Street where we discussed with the people their concerns and fears. We also were able to talk to the parents because of the training that we received, some of the behavioral and emotional problems that they may see in their children over the next few days and months as a result of this experience. As a further step, we sat down with parents and children in the neighborhood and discussed with the children their feelings about what they saw and what they did, using members of my division and Betsy's staff to work through the process of that traumatic incident of what they saw. On integration, this program, the Children Witness to Violence, does not stand alone. It is integrated through every program in the division. Our school-based community justice program, where we try to identify students before they get in trouble. Our anti-truancy program. Our domestic violence programs, where we intervene at an early stage in the family's life and try to work with the family and the children by using every resource we have, and by our youth service providers, where we have a social worker working in the station with street workers hired by the police department to work with the youth, and we can make direct referrals from our uniform officers to those people.
So what are the outcomes? First of all, over 200 children and families have received counseling and advocacy services from our program. Secondly, in an evaluation of officers who completed this seminar, we found that the training had resulted in very specific changes in police practices with regards to children. For example, 78% of the officers we have trained have made referrals to child mental health professionals on behalf of children. 72% of the officers have stayed in touch with us and have used us for subsequent consultation on other cases. Perhaps most importantly, we believe that this project has changed the public's perceptions about police, and in particular has changed children's perceptions of police officers. I will end with a story that briefly describes this change. We had a 7-year-old boy referred to our program who had been caught in gang crossfire. He was not physically injured, but he was psychologically terrified, and one manifestation of this terror is that he refused to go to school. It was my job, he was referred by a police officer, it was my job as his counselor to try to help him figure out how he could get back to school. In the course of my work with him, we began to talk about individuals in the community who could help him feel safe. He began to talk about the police officer who'd referred him to the program. And then he began to talk to me about an officer that he saw on the street out his window who helped cross children going to school, helped them cross the street. As we talked about this, he decided that in fact perhaps he could return to school if he could look out of his window every day and see that officer on the street. He went back to school. It worked, and I have ever since then wished that I could have told this officer how important he was in this child's life. As one brief proscript to this case, I want to also say that as we talked about this little boy's future, he told me that he wanted to be a police officer as he grew up. Thank you very much.
First question from Dick, then Barbara.
This seems like a wonderful idea. I just wonder if you have any numbers regarding the number of children. You mentioned 200 children had received counseling in a year. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. It was more, that's over a 2-year span.
Over a 2-year
right.
period.
Correct.
So, do you have any numbers in terms of how many children are exposed to this problem and therefore would be served by such a program?
I can answer that. I have on my division 2,500 active restraining orders at any given time. Those are domestic violence orders. If you average 2 to 3 children in a family, that gives you some idea of the potential that we're looking at. Magnify that by children who are victims or witnesses of other violence on the street. The numbers, we just can't really figure the numbers.
Barbara?
I can't seem to find it right now, but I believe I remember reading in the materials earlier that this program was focused on children 8 and under. Can you tell me why that distinction? I mean, if a child has witnessed violence and they're 9 or 10, I just had difficulty with the cutoff age.
We are the first to admit that that's an arbitrary cutoff age, but there are several reasons why we focused on the younger children. First, we believe that younger children's needs are less well recognized and therefore less well served. It's not unusual to hear, and we hear this from pediatricians, that a 2 or 3-year-old who witnesses his mother being beat up is not affected. And we know that that's not true. They are affected. And we believe that if we can intervene with a 2 and a 3-year-old, we've got a better chance at success. And perhaps we have a better chance of helping this mother get out of the violent relationship. So we took our limited resources and decided to focus them purposefully on younger children.
Does that apply in a domestic violence situation if there's a number of children in the household? Does the age 8 still apply in that setting?
No. We see if there's one child age 8, we work with the entire family. And we, in fact, partially because we have a hard time saying no, when we get referrals from Captain Dunford, we have actually seen a number of older children, so we can't say no.
Margot for the next question.
I noticed in the materials it mentioned that you were patterning this after a program at Yale, and I was just wondering how this one's different from that one.
The programs that we looked at that similar to this, is they take a small group of officers, they bring them in, they intensely train them as clinicians. Policemen want to be policemen. This program lets policemen be policing in the broadest sense of the word, with everything we do. And we use the resources of those people with the particular skills necessary. We're not trying to turn our police officers into clinicians. The other thing is, this is a district-wide program. We're trying to introduce 150 policemen, policewomen, detectives into the program so that when they go to a scene and they deal with the mother or they deal with the father, they then also recognize that the child is a victim and is someone that should receive respect and some kind of help.
Other questions? Yes, Jack?
I wonder if you help me get my head to where my heart is. This is such intuitively such a wonderful sounding program. Is there some way to get some numbers around it? Is there some way to measure its effectiveness in ways that another community where there's competition for resources can decide, yes, we want to do this rather than something else?
I think that as the program develops and we look at more and more numbers and we look at the children, then we'll be able to come up with quantified numbers. As we've delved into it for the last 2 years, most of the stuff that we have is anecdotal. That doesn't mean that it isn't meaningful, but to say that I can give you X and Y, at this point we can't. At least from the police perspective, we can't. I do know that my officers are reacting differently to situations. They're coming in and asking, how do we help? They're looking for street workers. They're looking for the social worker. They're looking for the community specialists that we have to assist them to go beyond the normal law enforcement role that most people perceive as the police function.
Max?
Have you had resistance from some of your officers, some who said, I don't want to do this, this is not what I signed on to do, it's not what I expected?
Yes, anything you do, you're going to get resistance from. There are some people who are locked into a law enforcement mold. Let me give you an example. We have a cop card program in the station. A lot of people didn't want anything to do with it. They saw the first group of cop cards. I had lines lining up to go. Oh, the cop cards are like baseball cards with individual police officers. Okay. And you get people lining up. As we train the officers and they find that it's not threatening their role but expanding their role, they buy in. And one of the greatest advocates of the program is an officer who's going to be retiring in January after 47 years in the police department. And he's our greatest cheerleader.
I would just add to that I think coming together around issues of children has been, there's less resistance to that. Even the most, from my perspective, the most hardened officer that we've worked with tells wrenching stories about their helplessness at seeing kids, you know, victims of violence or witness to violence. So I think that issue has really has brought us all together in a wonderful way.
The last question from Lynn.
Yes, the turf battle on the other side, though, do you get, and I don't know in Massachusetts what the appropriate title is, but the Division of Children and Family Services, some state that are the social workers. I mean, you're calling a rather specific group of people associated with a hospital. Do you hear, or you, officer, hear flack from them saying that's not something they should be doing?
Not at all. No, that has not. I mean, I think our roles are different. We are not charged in a protective service capacity at all. We may work collaboratively with our Department of Social Services, but the roles have been very different. And I don't know whether you've heard.
When we sit down with the school department, the Department of Social Service, and now the Office of Transition, when we start talking about specific families, police, school, the social DSS, we're all talking the same families. They're the families in greatest need of services who are demanding the most from government.
Tom, do you want to ask one last question? I think
Can I see
you
a cop
deserve
card?
1 minute over.
I'd have to go out to my cruiser, but I will.
Yeah, I'd like one of the cop cards.
If you give me your name and address, I'll send you a full set.
I have to tell you that we attempted to put a cop card into the pictures there, and it was rejected.
No, my picture on the cop card is behind the presidential seal at the John F. Kennedy Library. So.